The research study that I conducted was done in Baltimore. It was taken from a data set in Baltimore, which I collected from the Violence Intervention Program, which is situated at the University of Maryland Medical System Shock Trauma Center. We were looking at risk factors for repeat violent injury. So what are the factors that would bring a young black man back to the hospital? The first is previous history of incarceration, and I think that's risk factor speaks volumes about the number of black men who have been under some form of criminal justice supervision, whether they've been incarcerated or on probation or parole. But what we ended up finding is that well over 50% of the population that we were looking at had been hospitalized at least 2 or more times for a violent injury. And out of the trauma recidivists, 97%, I believe, have been incarcerated. And so what we've done is we've looked at each one of those risk factors, and every time someone checks off one, the likelihood of them being re-injured increases. And so if you check off, let's say, for instance, 3, your probability of coming back to the hospital is 88%. And so those individuals that have a higher risk of coming back to the hospital again for a violent injury are the individuals that we think we should divert most of our resources to. So I currently co-direct the Capital Region Violence Intervention Program, which is at Prince George's Hospital Trauma Center. And one of the recommendations we have clearly is to provide some form of psychosocial services to the young men that are part of our program. So that includes providing kind of mental health counseling to deal with issues around PTSD and depression, but also to provide social services in the form of employment, training, vocational training, education. I think that's the key for me, is that the research informs the intervention. And far too often we do the research and then it just stops, and we move on to the next research project, and what we end up doing is kind of exploiting, and I don't even think it's kind of, we do exploit many low-income, poor black communities, and we make a living off from doing that. And I have no interest in participating in that kind of exploitation, and so my research is much more applied. And so what I do is I go out into the field and I do all the research, collect all the data, but then I also go through a very thorough analysis and think very concretely about and constructively about how I can create an intervention from what I found.